Hello and welcome to today's webinar on the first steps in family history research. My name is Ginevra Morse. I'm the Director of Education and Online Programs here at American Ancestors and New England Historic Genealogical Society. I will be moderating today's event. We are a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We provide resources and expertise in nearly all aspects of family history and are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. And I also want to note that we are, of course, at this time broadcasting from our homes with various limitations and distractions. We do apologize in advance if there are any interruptions from our end, and we thank you in advance for your patience. Even if we do lose connection on our end, you will still have access to a full recording that will be available on our website. So today's presenter, I'm happy to introduce genealogist Ann Lawthers. Ann assists NEHGS library visitors both on-site and online with their family history research. She is a graduate of Wellesley College and the Harvard School of Public Health and has completed the Boston University Certificate in Genealogical Research program. She has conducted genealogical projects as an independent researcher and provides a number of educational programs throughout the year, again, both in person and online. Ann's areas of interests are New England and New York, the Mid-Atlantic, Ireland, Eastern Canada, and migration patterns. So now is a great time to start or perhaps refresh your interest in family history research, whether you want to prove or disprove a family myth, or maybe you've inherited family papers and heirlooms and want to piece together their story, or maybe you just want to learn more about your ancestral roots. So today's session will walk you through those first steps of family history, the records and tools that you're most likely to use, and then where to find the information that you're looking for. At any point during the presentation, feel free to type your question into the questions panel to the right of your screen. We'll address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. There is no handout for this session, but there is a fantastic free subject guide on getting started in family history research that you can find on our website. We'll also mention that during today's presentation, and I will be sharing a link to that in my follow-up email as well. So if you miss anything or feel like you need to take furious and rigorous notes, don't worry, you'll be able to access that subject guide as well as a recording of today's presentation on our website. All right, so without further ado, I will turn things over to Ann.
Thank you, Ginevra. I would first like to introduce all of you to the New England Historic Genealogical Society, also known as American Ancestors. What you are looking at now is our home base at 99101 Newberry Street. We were established in 1845 and are the oldest continuously operating genealogical society in America. We are supported by our members and serve nearly 100,000 constituents worldwide. The mission of the New England Historic Genealogical Society is to advance the study of family history in America and beyond. NEHGS educates, inspires, and connects people through our scholarship, collections, and expertise. And although New England is in our name, our scope is really international. Our collection covers the entire world, but we do have a special emphasis on the United States, New England, the Mid-Atlantic, and Canada's eastern provinces of Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, etc. And we do have collections that extend to England and Ireland, Scotland, and the rest of Europe. At our library on Newberry Street, we have 300,000 published genealogies, 400,000 local histories, and many other materials, including over 28 million manuscript items. We have millions of records on microfilm, reference works, compilations, and much more. But you don't have to go to our library to benefit from what we have. This is our homepage. It's where we display upcoming programs and activities. You can also initiate database searches from here, and I'm going to quickly introduce you to the scope of our databases. As of June 2020, we have 471 databases available for view from our website. If you are not a member of any HGS, but you are a guest member, you have access to 35 of those databases. The databases include vital records, a mix of images and transcripts, will abstracts, land record images, church records, military records, and much more. And now for the roadmap for the next 40 minutes or so. I'm first going to talk a little bit about what is genealogy. Then I'm going to introduce the essential tools for getting started in genealogy and where to find the information. So first, let's look at what is genealogy. Genealogy is a study of a line of descent from an ancestor. It is also the study of families and their history, which leads to the question, why should we study our family history? People have many reasons for becoming involved in this sometimes endless search, including wanting to leave a legacy for their own family, or perhaps they see genealogy as an engaging hobby. Maybe they want to apply to a lineage society such as the DAR, or maybe the Colonial Dames or the Mayflower Society. Some people become involved in genealogy because they are exploring dual citizenship. And then, of course, there's the curiosity factor. In any case, genealogy provides a window into history. It's a magic carpet ride. You find new places, new people, new lifetimes, new lifestyles, such as the picture here of an immigrant family on a crowded ship coming from Europe to America. And you also get glimpses of other times and occupations. So hold on to your seats when you begin genealogy. So now I'm going to focus on the tools and the techniques of genealogy. None of this is rocket science, but it does help to have and use some essentials. Adhering to a systematic process for researching your family will prove invaluable over the long term. This is the process we and other genealogists recommend that you follow when researching your family. First, identify what you know. Second, decide what you want to learn. You need a goal. You can't just do everything at once. Once you have a goal, you need to identify and locate your sources. Then you can actually get into the research phase, but it does not stop with research. You also have to analyze. And then you rinse and repeat. Genealogical research is rarely linear, which may frustrate some among you. It is rather iterative. So for example, at step 4, when you're doing the research, you may discover, oh, I need to go find some more sources. Or perhaps the research takes you to being able to write down the known facts. As you can see, you go back and forth during the process of genealogical research. There aren't many critical rules in genealogy, but the two that I'm going to mention, I would put right up there as very important. Rule number 1, work from the known to the unknown. You don't want to start with the Mayflower ancestor and try to build a case back to yourself that you have a Mayflower lineage. That's just going to lead to heartache from so many different perspectives. So work from the known to the unknown. And rule number 2 is write it down. I don't care how good your memory is, given the complexity of genealogy, you're going to need to record what you are researching and what you have found. So let's now take a deeper dive into these steps. Step 1, identify what you know. You're going to start by interviewing yourself. What do you know? What's in your brain about your family? Then you are going to scour your house for information, and I will go into that in more detail in a moment. You also need to talk to relatives. What do they know? What family stories were they told? And record the information either in the tools that I'm going to show you in a notebook or in genealogical software. Now, what do I mean by scour your house for information? Well, there are lots of treasures at home. You may have an old family Bible. That is gold. Take care of it. Old letters, letters from the past. I have some letters that go back to the Civil War for some of my relatives. Do you have diaries from your ancestors? And don't forget photographs. Photographs are wonderful to stimulate conversation as well as to document and record your history. Let's talk about the process of interviewing your family members. You probably want to talk to the older members of your family, and do talk to them before it's too late. When I became interested in genealogy in a very serious way about 20 years ago, my father already had Alzheimer's, and it was difficult to interview him and document and capture the information that he had. An example of some family interview questions might be, where did you live when you were growing up? The picture here shows my grandparents' farm in the 1950s and my grandmother's cat, Tarzan. How did your family come to live there? Were there other family members in the area, and what were their names? And what was your family's religion? Religion is an important factor to keep track of in family history because so many important records may be found in churches or in temples. Other family interview questions might be, what stories have you heard about your parents or your grandparents or more distant relatives? What stories have you heard about the origins of your family members? This is a photo of my husband's mother and her aunts taken in the late 1940s. And the woman who was seated was an immigrant, an Irish famine immigrant. So let's talk about the Essential Toolkit. You've interviewed yourself, you've begun to interview your family members, and you need a systematic way of recording information. So the first thing you're going to want to do is fill out a multi-generational chart, which is also known as a pedigree chart. You're going to want to fill out a family group sheet and a research log. And you're also always going to use pencil. Facts, new information may cause you to modify what you have initially recorded. So you'll find that you're erasing a lot, and a pencil and its eraser can become your best friend. So here is toolkit item number 1, the multi-generational chart. It starts with you as number 1. Then it lists your parents and your grandparents, your parents are numbers 2 and 3. The men are always even numbers. The women are always odd numbers. And an interesting feature about this multi-generational chart is that, let's say you are at your great-grandparents' generation, so you're at numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7, you can automatically figure out the number of the next person back by doubling the number. So 4 times 2 is 8, and that takes you to your second great-grandparents. Actually, it would be, yeah, excuse me. So this is the very sad state of my research when I began to look at my father's family. My father is number 1, Robert Lawthers, and I knew his parents' names, Robert J. Lawthers and Virginia Chamberlain, so my grandparents, numbers 2 and 3. And I knew the names of grandmother Virginia's parents as Antoine and Caroline, but I really didn't know very much else about them. For my great-grandparents, I didn't know when they were born, when they died. I knew roughly where they were born and where they died. And I knew absolutely zero about my father's grandparents, my great-grandparents, numbers 4 and 5. Now, the next form is the family group sheet. On the multi-generational chart, it only describes the direct lineage. So it only describes the people in the direct line of descent. So in my father's case, it does not capture that he had 2 brothers, but a family group sheet does. A family group sheet captures information about family groups. It's a snapshot of the family, the father, the mother, and the children. And so you record information about the children, birth, marriage, and death, as well as the names of spouses. And the better forms do include a place where you can write down where you found the information. It's always important to record where you found something. Sometimes you need to go back and verify that you got the right information. Sometimes you discover that, oh, that was a good source. I'd like to go back to it. But if you didn't write down where you found it, it's hard to recreate where you found it. Okay, so let's take a look at a filled out family group sheet. This is the family group sheet for my father's family. It shows his parents, Robert Joseph Lawthers and Virginia Chamberlain, and my father and his 2 brothers and their spouses. So this is what a filled out family group sheet might look like. Now, in terms of recording information, there are some general standards. These are not carved in stone standards, but they are very, very helpful. First, with names, write the surname in capital letters. This really makes it stand out when you're looking at a sheet with a lot of names. Record a woman with her maiden name. When the maiden name is unknown, use question mark or perhaps MNU, maiden name unknown, or just the given name. But do record the maiden name when you know it, because your ancestress was a unique individual, not just a wife. Now, dates. For dates, we typically record them as in the day, month, year format, and we usually use an alphabetic month so that we can avoid confusion between the European versus American way of recording a date. We don't use slash marks, and we don't abbreviate the year. For those of you who were around at the turn of the century and remember all the hullabaloo around Y2K, where the computers had been programmed with a 2-digit year, and all of a sudden they needed a 4-digit year. Well, genealogists, you're going to be going back centuries. You always need to use 4 digits. Now for recording places, you generally start with the smallest and go to the largest geographic division. So, for example, you might record the town of Orleans in Orange County in Indiana. A similar approach is used for outside the U.S., where you would record, say, a townland or a parish, the county, and then the country. And you do need to be sure to identify the counties. This is because many genealogical records are at the county level. Once you have picked on a style or decided on a style for recording, be consistent. Use that style for all your recording going forward. Okay, so that's the basics of step 1, figuring out what you know and writing it down. Now you need to decide what you want to learn. Look at the information you have. What's missing? What individuals or families really intrigue you? Where do you want to spend your time? And then you create a list of questions or objectives to research. So typical genealogical questions include: who are the parents? What's the date or place of birth, marriage, or death? What's the spouse's name or the maiden name? Who are the siblings? The way you can think about this is typical genealogical questions are about identity, events, and relationships. When you are writing down your questions, the go fish approach of give me all rarely works. Do be specific and targeted. So let's go back to that multi-generational chart. I didn't know my father's parents. I didn't know some details about my father's mother's parents, but because I knew absolutely nothing about my great-grandparents on my father's side, I decided that's where I wanted to start. I wanted to start trying to figure out who the parents of Robert J. Lawthers were. Now, a general tip, of course, is start slowly. Don't try to do everything all at once. A general principle is to research one person at a time rather than many people at once. Multitasking is quite fashionable in our society, but research has begun to demonstrate that that is not as effective as a focused inquiry. So take that to heart. Focus your genealogical inquiry and don't skip generations. It will only lead to your attaching the wrong person to your tree. Okay, now you need to figure out where you can find the information. At step 3, identifying and locating your sources, this is about educating yourself. What types of records will supply the information that I need? You can make a list of the records that will help you. Then you can go find the resources in repositories and online, and you map out a plan of action. Let's take a look at some common records. If you have a question about what is the birth date of my grandmother, where would I find that? The records that you would search first might be the vital records. You might also find that information in a newspaper, cemeteries, or a census, but that's your second step. Going a little further down the chart, if you need to know the immigration date of a person, you might start with the census. You might find it in a passenger list or a naturalization paper. But newspapers and biographies might also have that information. By the way, this chart is in that guide that you will have a link to. The chart actually has a whole nother page if you listing out the type of information you need and then which records you should search for first, followed by your secondary sources. And now a tip. As much as we would love it to be, not everything is online. Sigh. Sometimes you must go to a cemetery or to a courthouse or to a brick and mortar library to find something. But before you leave your home, you need to exhaust your home sources first. This is my story of a home sources bonanza. The family story was that my great-grandfather, Fred Homer, had died from hiccups in New Mexico Territory in 1903. When I first heard this story, I was about 12, and I sort of went, no, that just can't be true. Then, about 8 years ago, my sister sent me a box of letters that she'd been keeping, and she sent them to me as a Christmas present. The box of letters included all the correspondence between Fred Homer and his wife, Jenny Homer. Fred left Cleveland, Ohio in September of 1902. He went first to Oklahoma City and met up with his brother-in-law, friend Cook, and then they proceeded to go west across Texas to New Mexico Territory. So these are some letters. The first letter on your left side of the screen is in Fred's handwriting. It is dated 16th of January, 1903 in Lincoln, New Mexico. And Fred says, "We are having some winter now, a little day before yesterday and more now. Sun shone today, but strong wind." So Fred has been writing almost every single day to his, by the way, she was pregnant, to his pregnant wife in Cleveland, Ohio. Then 10 days later, there's a letter on the right from friend Cook, 26 January, 1903. "My dear Jenny, I presume you are getting anxious to hear from Fred. He is now suffering from a cause of bad bowels." The next letters actually explain the hiccups. So friend Cook takes up the writing on the 26th of January, and on the 30th of January, he says, "Dear Jenny, when I wrote you last evening, I felt that tonight I would have good news as the indications were favorable. But at 1:30 a.m., Fred began to hiccup. He would stop it for a time, then it would begin again, and so it kept up to noon today." Then, on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a postscript at the bottom of the second page of the letter. It says, "Fred passed away at 1:30 a.m. 31st without a struggle. God help you, Jenny." The letters between the 26th of January and the 30th January made it quite clear, based on the symptoms that friend Cook was reporting, that Fred had contracted typhoid fever. The hiccups occurred when the bacteria broke down his intestines, and the intestinal contents irritated the diaphragm, causing the hiccups. So, do check those home sources and put out the word to your family members that you are interested in family history. Materials will start coming to you. So after the home repository, we have online and brick and mortar repositories. Online, 3 of the most popular database search engines would be ours, American Ancestors, Family Search, which is free, and Ancestry, which is a subscription-based service. Brick and mortar repositories include libraries, local historical societies, or local archives. take a look at a search page from one of the online sources. This is the search page from American Ancestors. Most people start with the search page when they're going to American Ancestors or Family Search or Ancestry. The page usually has spaces for a name, for location, and for time periods. And just a hint, less is more. If you fill out these forms with too much information, you'll end up with 0 results. So sometimes it's better to put in just a little bit of information, such as a first and a last name, and then filter the results that come back to you. Okay, let's take a look at the Ancestry search page. It's similar. It's got the name, place, and date boxes, but do go beyond the search box. Both Ancestry and Family Search have very rich sources beyond the search box. Both Ancestry and Family Search and American Ancestors allow you to search their catalog. And Family Search has these, what they call research wikis. They are displayed on the right-hand side. These research wikis are basically articles about what kinds of records are available in the place that you are looking. And it gives dates. It tells you what the earliest vital record is, what the when vital record keeping became widespread. Were there any courthouse fires? What's the record loss? So do go beyond the search box. It's worth your while. Then your next step, you can begin your research. You can start answering your questions. A couple of general principles. You want to consult multiple sources. You also want to gather as many records about a family or a person as you can find. You will discover that record keepers are not consistent about how names are spelled, how dates are recorded, or even places are recorded. I like to tell patrons at the library that spelling is flexible, or spelling is optional. Spelling didn't really become standardized until the 20th century, when it became important for people to have a single spelling for their family surname. Prior to that, the spelling of a name was based on how the person writing the record heard it. So if the person speaking had a thick accent, the person writing the information down may have written something phonetically. Keep that in mind. Spelling is flexible. You also want to track your work, which leads us to toolkit item number 3, the research log. This helps you keep track of what you have researched. You need to include the date of the search, what you're looking for, where you searched, and the results. So let's take a look at a blank research log. This is one that's available online at American Ancestors, and it's important to record what you were looking for as well as whether or not you found it. Sometimes one book will give you lots of pieces of information. So if you're looking at the history of Frederick County, Maryland, perhaps you were looking for the Sigafus family. That was your first objective. You wanted to find out Daniel Sigafus's wife's name. But then you discovered that you really want to know about the Homer family in Frederick County, Maryland. So you'd have a new objective and you would need to write down the results, and do record a negative result. Okay, let's move on to analyze. Don't just read and accept. Actually examine what you're looking at. Does the record bring up new questions? Does it contradict what I've already discovered? What new information does it have? Is this an original record? Is it Is the handwriting original, or is this a transcription? Who provided the information for the record? You need to think of these things when you are looking at the record. Okay, let's do a quick review of the essential tools. Rule number 1, start with what you know and work backwards. Don't start at the end and work forwards. It just doesn't work. Rule number 2, write it down. 3, make sure that you use the tools, the multi-generational chart, the family group sheet, and the research log. And be systematic in your approach. Yes, your approach will end up being iterative, but you do have these steps that guide your research process. Identify what you know, decide what you want to learn, identify your sources, research, and analyze. Okay, let's talk about where you find those sources. This is the stage where you do a lot of education. What are the key sources for genealogists? The key sources are vital records, census records, passenger lists. Now, a note to the wise: a tree devised by someone else is not a key source. So if you're using Ancestry or Family Search, you will find that hints are given often to other people's trees. You need to take a look at how those other trees are documented before you can accept anything from them. So a tree devised by someone else is not a key source. So let's start with vital records. Oh, before we start with vital records, I'd like to point you to our Getting Started guide. It will help you navigate these sources. It will help you, it will remind you of the process that we have been talking about, and it will give you links to various key sources that you can use for your research. So this is the link, and you will be having it, receiving it in your email. So the tip is to use vital records to answer date and kinship questions. Here we have a death record from 1947. It's for my great-grandmother, Maud Bell Plowman, and it gives her death date, but the genealogical information in a death record is what people are most interested in. They want to know, does the death record name the parents? And in this case, it does. It gives the father as Reverend Newton Hervey Bell, born in Iowa, gives the mother as Emma Hall Curtis, born in New York. It also gives the birthplace of Maud Bell. She was born in Turkey, and yes, that is true. Her father was a missionary, and she and her sister were born in Turkey before Emma Hall Curtis said, "I've had enough, we're going back to America." And the other key piece about this record is the informant. The information for the death certificate was given by Jennifer Plowman, who was the daughter-in-law of Maud and had lived with Maud for 15 years. So she was a reliable informant. You're going to want to know who provided the information and evaluate that. Let's take a look at some earlier vital records. This is a pre-1906 vital record. These are typical of New England. One is for New Hampshire, one is for Vermont. These are abstracted from handwritten vital records kept by the town. The handwritten records kept by the town included land sales, selectmen minutes, and vital records. So in the early 20th century, the town clerks had to abstract that information. But New England is unique. New England has very good pre-20th century vital records. It's much sketchier in other states. Let's take a look at a town clerk's list, which is another type of vital record recording. This is for the town of Brookline. It's my grandfather, Edward Grosvenor Plowman's birth on December 16th. And it also mentions his parents as George T. and Maud Bell. So vital records, we're looking at them because they give us the dates of births, marriages, and deaths, but we're also hoping to get information about the parents. The next slide shows you published town records. This is for the town of Sutton and its marriages. And it shows Asa Grosvenor of Pomfret and Hannah Hall were married on the 24th of April in 1766. There are some caveats that you need to be aware of with vital records. As I said, they often provide the names of the individual's parents or spouse. However, colonial period marriage records typically did not include the names of the parents. So don't go looking for a colonial marriage record hoping to find the names of the couple's parents. It's not going to be there. Depending on the particular state that you are doing your research in, records may be held at the state level, particularly after 1900, at the county level, usually between whenever the county was formed and the 20th century, and perhaps at the town or city level, again, from the time a town or a city was formed up until about the 20th century. Also keep in mind that privacy restrictions may limit your access. If you're looking for a birth, marriage, or death record after about 1920, it will depend on the state as to whether or not you will be able to easily access that information. So now let's take a look at census records. We use census records to anchor a person to a place and a time. Records about genealogical events, about the births, about the marriages, about the deaths, are specific to a place and a time. And the census can often help steer us in the direction of the correct place. Now, for census records, those of you who've already started using them have probably discovered that from 1790 to 1840, only the head of the household is listed. There are not the names of every single member of the household. From 1850 to 1870, everyone in the household is listed, but not how they are related. Generally, you can assume that people in the same household are family. And from 1880 to 1940, relationships are listed. So next we have the 1850 census. This is the first time that everyone in a household was listed. It lists the name of the head of household first. It gives ages, gender, and also place of birth. Very helpful. Next, we have a 1900 census. Beginning with 1900, the Census Bureau began to add questions to the census, and the added questions were changed from year to year. In 1900, the added questions included things like, for the woman of the household, how many children had she had, and how many were still living. It also includes information about when a person arrived in this country if they were born elsewhere. This is for my husband's great-grandfather, James Crotty. He's the first line, and you'll see that he was born in Ireland, and you will see that this reports that he and his wife and oldest daughter arrived in 1859. There's an NA after that, which indicates he was naturalized, that is, he became a US citizen. So a couple of tips about the census. The census taker did not have to talk to anyone in the household. The census taker, if they had made multiple attempts to get the information, could talk to a neighbor if no one was at home. So we don't know who provided the information that is listed by the census taker until 1940. In 1940, the census taker was required to identify who provided the information. Also keep in mind that we are viewing copies of the original. There were several copies made, one sent to the federal government, one kept at the state level, and one kept at the local census level. Although there were few mistakes, there were occasionally mistakes, and do keep in mind that transcription errors could occur. And as I mentioned, families were not asked to spell their names, so you get some really creative spellings in the US federal census. Okay, let's go to the last key source. The last key source is a passenger list, and this passenger lists will answer the question about where someone is from. The passenger list that I'm going to show you is from 1849. It's for James Crotty. In 1900, James Crotty said he arrived in 1859, but here is his passenger record in 1849. I know it's the right guy because it's James Crotty, wife Eliza, and he's a stonemason. His occupation allowed me to link him across multiple records. Now, most early passenger lists don't provide a lot of detail about where in Ireland or Scotland or wherever a person came from. So let's talk about a few passenger lists caveats. Passenger lists were not required until 1820. People come into the library all the time and they say, I'm looking for the passenger list of my ancestor who arrived in 1680. I'm sorry, passenger lists did not survive. They were not required at the destination port. Therefore, they weren't filed and maintained. Philadelphia, on the other hand, did require passenger lists for foreigners beginning in 1729. So if your ancestor from Germany came through Philadelphia in, say, 1750, you're probably going to find a list, but you are not going to find a list if your ancestor was emigrating from Ireland or Great Britain, because it was all part of the same country at that point. Very few lists from 1620 to 1640 have survived, but virtually nothing else in the 17th and 18th century. So don't waste your time, it's not there. Okay, let's review. First, vital records, major cornerstone of genealogical research. It answers questions of kinship, that is relationships, and dates of specific events. The census helps you anchor a person to a time and a place, which in turn directs you to where to go look for other information. And a passenger list will give you a broad stroke of where someone was from. I'd like to let you all know about our online chat service. If you are just getting into genealogy, you might want to take advantage of our chat service. It is 3 to 4 offered Tuesday through Saturday. It's free. We can respond to quick questions. We don't have the time in an hour to respond to your brick walls, but we can help explain a website or a resource, give you a quick pointer on where to go look for something, define an unfamiliar term, etc. And to get there, you can go to our homepage and click on chat.
All right, well, thank you, Anne, for that fantastic presentation and going over or reviewing the first steps to family history. So now let's get to your questions. If you have anything that you'd like to ask Anne, go ahead and type it into the questions panel. So a few people have actually asked about what we term double dating. So how do you record the date for both a Julian and Gregorian calendar date? What are some of the standards that we should practice?
Okay, if your ancestor had an event between January and March in years before, and I'm not going to get the date right, it's 1765 or you'll have to look it up. But basically, the year started in the middle of March for centuries, and if your ancestor was born or died between January and March of one of these early years up to about 1760, you record 2 years. You record the year that it would have been if the new year started on January 1, and you record the year that it would have been if the new year began in March.
All right, and I know a few people are asking about where do we find the record-keeping logs, the multi-generational chart, the family group sheets that we shared. So all of those are available on our website in the download section, and I can include a link to that in my follow-up email as well. Those are freely available, downloadable. Most of them are editable PDFs, so if you prefer not to have to print it out and write it in by hand using a pencil, you can also type in some of the information that you're finding as well. And I'm happy to provide a link to those resources. But as I mentioned, those are free and available to anyone. A few questions about passenger lists, several questions about passenger lists. And I know that some of them are specific to different areas, you know, coming from Scotland, Germany, England. Are there resources or maybe a wiki that you can share for people who do want to learn more about the specifics of passenger lists? What kind of references or resources do you suggest they seek out?
Okay, I would recommend going to the Family Search Research Wiki, and I would search by, there's two ways you can do it. One, you can look at migration from Germany, and then go to passenger lists. Usually they have extra, they will list the various pages that have information about passenger lists. So I would start with the Family Search wikis first. Either looking for a country-specific passenger list or looking more generally at immigration and emigration.
Now, Donna says, I have boxes from family members that are just completely unsorted. How do I start? Do I kind of sort as I go? Do I record as I go? So I think this is a common situation where we might inherit someone else's work, or we may be suddenly the family repository of all the family treasures, which is great. But how do you really start going through those and making sense of it and moving forward with the research that has already been done? Any suggestions there?
Well, let's say you get this wonderful present of 4 big boxes of materials from your family. The first thing you want to do is open them up and get a sense of the scope of what you are looking at. You're not going to start out immediately by cataloging it. You want to find what's in there, and that should help you identify an organizing principle. So if you've received someone's genealogical papers, you're probably going to establish a system of keeping track by family of what's in these boxes. If it's mostly letters, you're probably going to sort the letters by either sender or recipient, depending on the nature of the family. So for example, the family letters that I was displaying were in the presence, were my great-grandmother, Jenny Homer's letters. The ones that she sent to Fred haven't survived. So in this case, they were organized by her name as opposed to Fred's name. So you need to get a general sense first before you start organizing. And then you will need to spend some time thinking about, how do I want to organize this? Do I organize it by place? Do I organize it by event? One of my boxes is all the material from my grandmother's funeral and also from my mother's funeral. You know, the things that you generally have on display at a funeral home or a reception, photographs, items, etc. So you need to think about what makes sense for the collection that you are dealing with. And then once you have a sense, once you've identified an organizing principle, you can begin the work of sorting and organizing and recording. But that comes after you've thought about it for a while.
Thanks. Some great first steps, certainly. A few people are also asking about free versus paid websites and subscriptions. Can you just review maybe out of the three that we talked about, so AmericanAncestors.org, Ancestry.com, and Family Search, are those what's free, what's paid, and other tips for either getting free resources or suggestions on subscriptions?
Okay. Ancestry is a paid subscription. They have different levels of paid subscriptions. Their super deluxe version includes newspapers.com as well, and access to international records. Most people starting out don't need that. Family Search is a great site because everything there is free. You do need to register and you need to start the bones of a tree in order to begin to access the materials on Family Search. But Family Search is definitely a place you want to go once you're out of New England and you're looking for things like land records or probate records or obscure vital records. Our site, American Ancestors, as I mentioned at the beginning, 35 of the databases are available without a subscription. You don't have to become a member. But we do have 3-month memberships so that you could dip your toe in the water, so to speak, see if this makes sense for you. Yes, as I also said, New England is in our name, and many of our resources are New England focused, but we do have an international and national scope in our holdings.
And Madeline also makes a good note that many public libraries also have access to an institutional membership to Ancestry. They may have an institutional membership with American Ancestors, with newspaper sites, with others. So certainly using a public library and seeing what resources they have available to you is a fantastic idea. So especially if you're getting started. And they usually have some expertise or some suggestions if you are just starting out with your family history research. But we're, of course, always available and happy to help you as well, either through our consultations, our chat service, Ask a Genealogist, which is also available to members. So lots of different ways to really access help and get some of those subscriptions. And if I wonder if you could also maybe talk a little bit about, we often get the question, well, which subscription should I have? What should I pay for? Is there kind of a one-stop shop for online resources?
I think the closest to the one-stop shop that is affordable is Family Search. As I said, ours, American Ancestors, is very, very deep in New England, and we do have other material, but Family Search also shares a number of the databases that we have. We collaborate with them and exchange information. That said, you need to think about what areas of the country, what time periods that you are researching. If you have been doing this for a while and really are ready to jump across the pond, you might want to consider an Ancestry subscription with some of the world records, although Family Search does have very good international holdings. It's a personal decision based on where your research is taking place. That is, what time period and what location you are researching in. That should really drive your decision around subscriptions.
And I know that there are lots of questions that are coming in that are more specific to different areas, what kind of records exist. Unfortunately, we can't get to all of them today. I do want to just make a few notes because there are some questions about what resources we offer. So in my email follow-up to all of you, you will get a link to becoming a free guest user. And when you become a guest user, you have access to all of our archived webinars. And we've gone over, we've been doing webinars on at least one a month for the past 6 years. We have a large library of archived webinars on researching Native American history, early New England history, African American history, using the census, using newspapers, almost any topic that you can think of. We have archived webinars that you will have access to through your free guest user account. You also will have access to, as Anne mentioned, about 35 databases, so you can kind of test out to see what we have. A lot of those do pertain to Massachusetts. We have probate file papers, the entire probate, not just an index. So those are freely available, a lot of other resources. So there are some great things that you can test out just through that guest user account. Also, all of our upcoming webinars, again, we do 1 to 2 free webinars each month, and those are free, open to the public. These are always recorded and made available on that archived library, so you just need a free account to access those recordings. I do want to just also mention that we have a number of subject guides, and those you don't even need a guest user account to access. So these are subject guides, again, on a variety of topics, on Native nations of New England, of 17th century New England research, Chinese American research. They're kind of like wikis, but they are specific to some of the resources that we have at American Ancestors, both in our library collection, in our digital and in-person manuscript collections, databases. So those are another great way, especially if you're just getting started, or maybe you're delving into a different area that you're unfamiliar with. All of these wikis and subject guides are a great resource to learn what's available, some of the general references that are available to you, and how to really make headway. And do you have any kind of final thoughts as far as other resources that people should delve into if they are interested in specific areas or wanting to learn more about family history?
Well, one of the things that I did not mention, but did occur to me as you were speaking, is that the Library of Congress has a number of resources, both military resources and local resources. The whole Chronicling America effort that they engaged in has documented materials from all over the United States. And of course, as a federal agency, that is freely available to you. So that's another possible place to go.
Great suggestion. And certainly your local genealogical society too. All of these resources are available to you. You just need to look for them and reach out. And most of us are, we're all happy to work with you and to really take you further along your family history journey. So unfortunately, as I noted, that is all the time that we do have for today, but you may consider scheduling a consultation or hiring our research services team. You can learn more about those services by contacting the email addresses on your screen. I also suggest that you take advantage of that free chat that Ann mentioned, which happens Tuesdays through Saturdays. That's a great way, again, free, open to the public. If you have a quick reference, I know some of you were asking about, where do you find this type of record, or the originals of the Barber collection, or passenger lists, military records. If you have quick questions like that, certainly take advantage of that chat service, and you'll find that on our homepage, and I'll also include a link to that in my follow-up email. But I want to thank you all for joining us today. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback on today's presentation. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any and all feedback is extremely helpful and appreciated. And if you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center at americanancestors.org//education. So stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you at our online programs in the future. Goodbye for now.